Hi, everyone, and welcome to Maybe Muslim, a podcast that aims to define and redefine the idea of being an Indian, a Muslim, and everything in between. I am Mariam Haider, producer and host of the podcast, and today I am joined by Sameera Khan. Sameera is a Mumbai based independent journalist, researcher, and co author of the critically acclaimed book Why Loiter Women and Risk on Mumbai Streets, which examines women's access to public space. A journalist for 3 decades, she is a former assistant editor of the Times of India Mumbai, until recently taught a master's level journalism course at the School for Media and Cultural Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. For the last decade, Sameera has also been a media trainer, guiding journalists on how to cover violence against women. She won the National Laadli Media Award for Gender Sensitivity 2020 for her consistent engagement as a teacher, trainer, researcher, and a journalist in promoting sensitive reporting on gender based violence. In this episode, Sameera and I discuss how women, exclusively Muslim women, access public space and the ways they negotiate with it. In light of the ongoing Karnataka hijab law, Sameera shares her own personal experiences, her research, and subsequently her writing, which has helped build a wider understanding of women negotiating with public spaces for freedom of movement, education, recreation, and fun in the times we live in. Hi, Sameera. Firstly, thank you so much for coming on Maybe Muslim. I know we've been having a conversation for a while, and I'm really glad that I could finally have this conversation with you and speak about some of the topics and the urgent way that we want to address some of the topics through this conversation.
Thank you so much, Mariam, for having me. I'm really happy to be on Maybe Muslim, a podcast I greatly admire.
Thank you so much for those kind words, Sameera. So let's just start from your life as a researcher, as a journalist, growing up in Mumbai, and really share some of the experiences that have shaped the way you are as a writer, as a journalist, as a researcher today.
Okay, so I'm a first generation Bombayite. That is, my parents came from northern India to settle in Bombay and work. They came for their jobs. They came to work here, and I was born and brought up in Bombay, and I sort of prefer calling it Bombay, but well, I don't mind calling it Mumbai occasionally as well. But I went to school and college in Bombay, and I think it was just the most wonderful growing up experience. My summer holiday was spent in northern India with relatives, but all through the year I lived and grew up in Bombay. The neighborhood I grew up in was was very mixed and with a great sense of what I call is neighborliness. I mean, people were interested in your life. They were sort of very relaxed, laid back, nobody bothered about who you were or when had you come to Bombay, had you been born there, were you an outsider? That didn't seem to matter, or at least when I was growing up, I didn't seem to notice that in the suburb I lived in Bombay, which was Bandra. It was a very mix of different communities and different classes. I later moved to South Bombay because of my dad's job, but but I remember, if I look back and think at the age of 18, being on my college campus in South Bombay, I just thought I was mighty privileged and really happy in life, couldn't get better in that sense. And I was only looking forward to well, I just thought life could only get better after this. It was already pretty good. I sort of so I need to say this because it sounds like, very idyllic, but basically I was pretty much in love with my city, with Bombay, with being a Bombayite, very proud of that identity when I went to other parts of the country. But I was also proud of being Indian. I can't even exemplify how it meant, but it meant, I don't know, it was like, it was a very innate feeling of great sense of wonder and confidence in the country. And I didn't think of other things which could divide me or take me away from the country or whatever. But and I'm saying this actually as a prelude to what I'm going to say later, because then life. I became a journalist. I trained in media. I became a journalist in Bombay with two local papers, one after the other. But there was an event while I was a reporter in my early 20s. We had the 92-93 riots. These are the Bombay riots which took place after the fall of the Babri Masjid. Many parts of the country saw violence, but Bombay particularly saw very sort of very nasty. And what was very unusual about the Bombay riots at that of 1993, as opposed to other riots which the city has seen or its outskirts have seen, is that it was a riot spread across all areas and neighborhoods of the city, across the city, which was unique, and also it affected people of all classes and backgrounds. Uh, my family, it turned out to be a very pivotal moment in my life, and my growing up experience, because it wasn't just we were. It turned out that we were the only Muslim family in this building in South Bombay. My building didn't have other Muslims. A fact that I had not noticed till the riots took place, which has to be, we had good neighbors, good things going on. But then eventually things came to pass because there were election lists passed around, Muslim names identified, we had mobs at the gate. We felt greatly threatened that we were forced to, for a brief while, to leave our home and all our belongings and sort of take refuge somewhere else. We were privileged because we could find this place very easily to go away to. But that's become a very important part of my personal history. At the moment you are forced to leave home, not out of choice, because others make a choice, and then you are, taken out. For example, one of the things which happened on the Bombay riots is people took out names of people who were Muslim, took out their name board. So every apartment building in Bombay, at the bottom, you have your flat number and the names of the family who stays there.
Right.
And usually many buildings in Bombay at that time, when they realized that people were hunting down Muslims by those name boards, coming to the reception area of the building and looking at this, many of them removed the full, name board. My building took this unique position that they will remove the name only of the Muslim family. So if you counted the flats, you knew one flat was missing. It was quite terrifying. It was terrifying, but we were just numb, with shock that this was happening. I remember feeling just huge amounts of shock. I couldn't believe this was happening in my favorite city, the city I was so much in love with. This was they were hunting you down, literally. And eventually we didn't lose. Nobody in my family lost their life. We didn't lose any precious belongings. Other people have suffered much more in those riots and in other riots after that. But I have to say, despite all that, and despite my privilege and all, I that event has marked my life in very clear terms, and I can see my life before 1993 and afterwards. In terms of thinking, maybe it came at an opportune time in my early 20s. I had moved away from studying, and I was already working. I've been working for almost 2 years then as a journalist. And, it just changed my whole relationship, to the neighborhood, to the city, to the country, and just in the way I thought about it. It was not that mad love which I had. And it was not about just the violence and the stories you heard of violence in different neighborhoods, but how we eventually, in those riots and after, became reduced to just as one identity. We became Muslims. We were Indian Muslims. And that became our defining thing. And I just couldn't believe it. I thought we were so many other things we could have been, and we were so many other things. But I felt we just got reduced to, and eventually, and we were treated then that we were the outsiders. There was this feeling which percolated through the riots and after. And strangely enough, you thought things would eventually get better and back on but things have only got progressively more complex and more difficult in some ways. Though I personally haven't had such a difficult life, but I have to say, even if people don't, and they're privileged to witness an event, when you witness an event like this firsthand, it's sort of, I don't know, it makes you rethink a lot of things, or it makes you very sad that you have to see things in such a different light, when I was so positive about all these, my city, my country, whatever. And I kept thinking, okay, it'll pass and it will all get back to even keel, but it hasn't. It hasn't.
I can almost sense like the pain over the decades. I feel like that you have kind of lived through, and you have constantly found ways to understand, how that has impacted you. And while you were telling me about your experience, one of the things that I have kind of noticed is there's difference between owning your space. So I think before you mentioned the 92, 93 violence, the way you talk about Mumbai is almost like the city owns it's one over your heart, and you own it. You feel it belongs to you in so many different ways. And after the
that's the
violence,
right way. Yeah,
right?
that's the right way. I agree with that. Yeah.
And after the violence, I mean, it completely would have just in what like in a few days time, it completely violated that feeling. And now you were thinking about how to claim that space that you always thought was yours in the first place, right?
Correct. Yeah. I
uh,
agree. I totally. Actually, this year will mark 3 decades of the 1923 riots. End of
mm,
this year will mark 3 decades of the fall of the Babri Masjid.
mm,
And I have still in 3 decades not been able to make sense of exactly what shifted. What shifted personally in me? I know what happened to the city. I researched those things, but what happened to me personally, I still have not got a real finger on. I keep trying to, but for example, I was a journalist. I was a writer. I could have
mm,
written tons on it. I did some riot reporting, but more importantly, you know, it took me 5 years to write my first personal piece where I kind of mentioned that we had been affected. 5 years, and very tentatively I put down words on a
mm,
paper, and it was for an edition of the Times of India at that point. Sunday
mm,
Times was doing a whole page on 5 years since the Bombay riot, and then it took me another 5-10 years to write another piece. I have barely written about my experience of that riot and how it makes me feel the way I'm talking to you, because I don't find the words. I find it very difficult to put it in words as to what shifted, what has changed. It's so, for example, with friendships, I didn't really lose close friendships. I had close friends who stood by, who were very supportive, who always, called up, made sure they mentioned. We didn't pretend it didn't happen. I mean, they talked about it and
mm,
talked about how upset they were equally about it, and they couldn't imagine what I felt about it. I mean, I'm talking about non-Muslim friends.
mm,
I mean, so that was also the time I discovered that because the kind of upbringing I had had in Bombay, I had a lot of non-Muslim friends. I had very few friends who were Muslim, and not because I was calculating. I wasn't calculating. I have 5 Christian friends or 10 Hindu friends and 8 Muslim friends. That was not part of your calculation the way you went through school and college at the time I was growing up. It was just, and had never thought about. So it's just, so all these things I'm now forced to think about. Sometimes I think maybe I was a naive idiot. We grew up in times I just didn't notice it, or the kind of family I had. We weren't paying attention to these things. But
mm.
so there had to be, triggers of this happening all the time. But how come I didn't notice this? Or I was just lucky I didn't have to notice this. Whatever. But definitely that event has made me, it has stayed. I would just say it stayed.
When I was going through some of the work that you've done, understanding how Muslims, especially in the context of Mumbai/Bombay, kind of find their spaces or live or figure out what spaces means for them. You've spoken to so many people, within the subsets of the Muslim community, and in a city like Mumbai, like you have showcased how they have renegotiated their peace with the space they belong to and the spaces they want to belong to. And whatever's happening in Karnataka at the time, the way young Muslim girls are not being allowed to wear the hijab, enter again public institutions, enter colleges, private colleges as well, because they're choosing to wear the hijab. It made me go back to some of your work. It made me want to kind of think about how time and again women, and then exclusively Muslim women, are being challenged when they are claiming public spaces, are being challenged when they want to be in spaces and visibilize themselves. How has the entire Karnataka situation kind of, maybe has it made you understand the situation in a broader light, like see what your research has brought so far, the understanding of where we are at with the situation?
Okay, so just to take a step back, is to say why I feel qualified to talk about the Karnataka situation, not only just as a Muslim woman, but as a researcher and writer.
Mm.
Because in the early 2000s, from 2003 to 2006, I got involved with a project called Gender and Space Project, which eventually led to our book, my co-authored book with my colleagues Shilpa Fadke and Shilpa Ranade. the book called Why Loiter? Women and Risk on Mumbai Streets.
Right.
So, but Why Loiter was based on a 3-year, actually very in-depth research project set in Bombay, looking at women's access to the city and to public space. How did women negotiate that access in different ways? I already had interest of looking at Muslim inner city areas and negotiations of men, women, look at the community, how the community come to be. So I had a great interest in the old Muslim mohallas of Bombay. And I was doing that research simultaneously, separately on my own. I brought that research interest to this project, which was on gender space, which had not initially planned to look at community or religious communities, but I brought in that interest and we decided to look at the group of, Muslims are the biggest minority in the country. And there's a big percentage of Muslims in Maharashtra and in Bombay. And so to look at just negotiation, Muslim women men to public space. So I brought that research interest to the project, and I was focusing on that besides other things in the project. But so that is so I spent a lot of time doing focus group discussions, following Muslim women, spending time with them, doing individual interviews, and looking at how do they get negotiate with family, community to go out. The hijab came in a big way as part of that discussion as to observing the hijab or not. I had already noticed that since I had grown up in Bombay, and by the time we were doing our research in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, 2005, there was already a lot more women observing hijab and referring to wear it. And so the conversations often went around that. So, with and because our project focused on accessible, how accessible is the public to women in general, and particularly if you're marginalized women somewhere, you could be marginalized because of seniority or disability, or because of your sexuality, or because of being a part of a certain class group, or because of a certain religious community. How did that also affect your negotiation to this access as public space? So that research has shown us that, because that research has continued, we've continued doing workshops even after the book came out in 2011. We do a lot of workshops with young women and talk to all kinds of things. The key thing was that to keep at the center was how do you, accessibility should be your lens to look at, not eventually choice, whether it's integral to religious faith or not. Accessibility. If you want education to be accessible to all women, you want to be accessible to women you consider marginalized or minority women. If the hijab is going to facilitate their access to the public and to that school, college, university, higher education, then why can't we think around those lines? And this is, I'm talking with regard to Muslim women, the hijab. It could be any other category of person or woman or not, who is also held back because of something. And then you say, wait a minute, I want to empower them and make them access education. This is a basic rights, constitutional rights, that we have rights to the public, we have rights to education, we have the right to be who we are and be accepted as who we are. So I feel that actually the answer is very simple. And in the piece I wrote about this, people sort of responded very positively by and large, but I couldn't understand why they couldn't see it so clearly the way I could see it. I thought it's a very clear point. These are the girls, they need education. If this facilitates it, what's wrong with that? Anything which facilitates it, as long as it's not, that facilitation doesn't involve violence towards someone else. So the hijab doesn't involve violence towards someone. It facilitates it. Now, when you say, couldn't they facilitate education without it? Yeah, in some parts, I'm a Muslim woman, I don't observe hijab. But I also consider that maybe it was my privilege. I didn't have a mother or grandmother all observing hijab. I came from a certain culturally privileged kind of background. That affected it. But for some other people, even when they've come from a privileged background, they made choices different from their mothers and grandmothers.
Right. Yeah.
Because the word choice is so bandied about. Is it choice in a vacuum? Is it real choice? Is the community pushing? Who's pushing them? Is it some religious preachers? I am more interested in what are you doing with that. Okay, so I think to get caught in only the veil and the lens of we have problems looking at the veil and women. What about looking at what facilitates women's movement and accessibility? What are they, if they're being able to study, if they're able to access work, make better choices about their lives and travel with it, and do other things with it? Then I think why should I it's not right for me to raise protest about it. So I think the one is the veil. I mean, I'm passing on life, but one is the big problem with this Karnataka discussion is that it's become you're pro the hijab, you're anti the hijab in this camp or that camp. And this is a very simplistic, sad way to look at the issue, because the issue of the veil is much more complex. It's historically been complex. If you look back at the veil in other countries like Egypt and Turkey and Algeria, is part of anti-colonial struggles, is part of the issue of becoming modern as a modern state. The veil has been used or discarded at different points of time. So I'm not going to get into, is it integral to Islam? Is it, why no discussing in context of that? Because I'm actually not a religious expert in that sense. And I don't want to go and say yes or no or whatever. My point is, I don't think that's the moot point. That is not the crucial point. The crucial point is we want women from Muslim women, as you want all other women, to flourish and grow with their lives and have some, and education is such a great weapon. Education sort of can change your mind, can open gateways. It's about the. I don't think in 2022 any of us argue about it. And I think everybody who's every side of the debate doesn't argue about education and women. Most people that is agreeable. So if education comes because of if the veil, or maybe we can negotiate some parts of the veil, whatever. But the point to say that you have to remove your turban, your veil, your Sikh kada or anything because to access education is just not. We don't accept you as who you are. We will accept you only if you follow ABC. And again, the ABC is supposed to be this secular, non-religious sort of costume on you. Now, I want to question, what is this secular, unreligious costume? Who has defined this? Like, what is it? So is it the pinafore I wore to, convent school? Because that is not considered as secular, religious. Certain people wear it more often. Other communities don't wear it at all. So the point is, so where is this? It's very easy to say this is secular and irreligious because someone has decided that and say, but that also comes from a certain cultural tradition and sort of, whatever. So to say that, this is secular, I think it's a very complicated debate. So if you kept all this aside, is it essential to, is it integral to this faith? Is it integral to, but if it's allowing, if it's integral to the education of that girl, then I think it's integral. So that is more important, to keep that at the focus. Besides, the other point which I've been trying to make is education is the first step. I'm hoping that these women, whether they observe the hijab or don't observe the hijab, and I feel both are equally important choices Muslim women make, whether they want to observe it or not. Sometimes, of course, it's tradition and family custom and religion, but many times it is about accessibility. Many women are conscious, and they say this in interviews. It's also because it facilitates more movement. They can access the public much more easily, or much more of the public if they observe the hijab. So some of them just negotiate that. Other women negotiate in different ways. So women negotiate the public in different ways. It's the timing they keep, how late they stay out, whether they travel in a group or not, if there's someone to drop them home. So they're constantly producing this safety and producing this accessibility for them. In the absence of all state structures or institutions not providing it for them, they themselves produce all kinds of women produce in different ways. So they do different strategies. So I think the hijab is one of the strategies women use, but they also use it in other ways. So to use, okay, hijab is only used as a strategy for public access is not correct. Because they could use, so a lot of women say, no, I started observing the hijab post particularly the riots. I mean, after communal riots, we often see the wearing of the hijab has gone up among Muslims. There's a community which is pushed against a wall, and increasingly, and this is a very important hard-nosed reality. Muslims in India have, over the last 3 decades, been pushed against a wall. There is all kinds, so it's not even now you need a communal riot to create that. You can just do a lynching of one single person, take a Muslim fruit seller off your street, not allow one company which is owned by Muslims to sell idli batter. You can just, all kinds of things. Employment is threatened. The craftsmanship is threatened. And now education. So it's you are clearly, these are definitely ways to invisibilize Muslims from the public space. You do not see them. We don't want them in institutions. And this is really, really worrying. And I think that is the key. You have to look at certain issues in the course of timing. So definitely last 3 decades, violence against them has gone up. Since 2014, and the present government in power has definitely even worsened it. They have normalized violence against Muslims. It seems very normal to understand this happens to Muslims, or this happens to a Muslim-dominated state like Jammu and Kashmir. We normalize it. It's okay. It's perfectly fine to have this. So it's and it is very, very scary. So I mean, the fears I had post 1993, I mean, there's nothing that's a little speck compared to what the kind of fears we have now, because it is clearly. And so when you've been pushed against the wall, I mean, just to come back to it, a lot of women say that this is their way. They wear it as an identity symbol, identity marker. People say, why do they need it? Because when you are threatened, when you are fearful, sometimes you need to say, I am there. I want to be visible. I want to visibilize my community. Often it is not done as, I don't think every Muslim woman has thought through this, but sometimes, particularly in the aftermath of violence, these thoughts have gone through the minds of young Muslim women who often have chosen to wear it even when their mothers did. So that is one reason. One is, of course, your community pushing you. Other reason is to access public space. There's so many complex reasons. And throughout history, women have used all kinds of devices. Dress is only one of them. There are many other devices they also use in order to access the public. Because women have been pushed into, it's been understood that the outside, the public sphere is for men, and the private sphere, the home, is for women. And to break these boundaries, of course, men can also come into the private sphere. I mean, they also have rights over that. But women, to establish rights over the public space and public sphere, to make something, have often had to chip away their boundaries. These have not been given on a silver platter. Come, join us. Women had to chip away. Education was one major way of, getting access to that. Then, of course, chipping away for higher education. Then for work privileges. Then it's not even that. I mean, the study. But while I try to go to, what about pleasure? What about pleasure in the city? What about?
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question for you. It is something that I have. I think as a woman as well, growing up in India, that is something that you were very always cautious about. Like, are you going out for work? Are you going out for studying, tuitions, whatever? Or are you going out for fun? Like, it was something that was implied that you have to think about it. Like, is it necessary? Is it something that you should even bother with, And with Why Loiter, and even now there are other groups which are doing similar kinds of, initiatives in NCR and Delhi. The idea of claiming space is just for fun. The idea of claiming space is because why not? I want to walk out at midnight. The city should be safe for me, just like it is for anyone else, And I really feel like this breeze of fresh air, honestly, because it allows women to just think of very nonchalantly of how they can access a space just because they want to. There doesn't need to be any reason beyond them wanting to do it.
Correct. Yeah. That's very true. So, one of the things eventually our Gender and Space Project, Why Loiter Project, found was the 21st century city, Indian city, public space. In public space, women always have to establish two things. One is that to establish a sense of purpose, demonstrate purpose, and show why are you out, for what purpose. And the second thing, they have to always manufacture respectability for themselves. Always show that they're good women, worthy of protection by society. So you show we're out there as mothers picking up our children from school, or I am a good girl, I'm going to school and just coming back from school or college and back, and I'm not. So I walk this straight line from point A to B, and I'm just a commuter in public space. Eventually, my real place is in the private sphere. And they constantly, it seems to be that it's more important to protect their reputations than actually produce actual safety for themselves. We saw this when the women said that they dropped out late at night. They made sure it wasn't, if there was a male dropping them home, a colleague, they would make sure it wasn't near outside there where their apartment building was, but somewhere, at the end of the street. Even if the street was dark, they would run through it and go there. So then you were saying, but isn't your physical safety compromised? But that didn't matter so much but my reputation is intact. My family's reputation is intact. The watchman hasn't seen me, the maid hasn't seen me, nobody looking out the window has seen me. So I have taken real risks my physical safety because of the reputation. And we really believe that women would be more physically safe if they didn't have to go through this whole, really this whole making up this whole thing of what my reputation is, my respectability, to balance all these factors and purpose, and then it comes to my physical safety. That's really low down on the ladder.
And I'm digressing.
They weren't forced to do it.
I'm
Sure.
digressing a bit here, but it also makes me think about how much women have to keep in mind for something as simple as just meeting a friend at a cafe somewhere in the evening. Like if all these
Yeah.
worries or anxieties were not part of a woman's psyche, then perhaps there was so much more time and bandwidth for her to do so many other things. Like if I have to think that do I have my own car? Can I come back on time? Will I face any kind of troubles while returning? Is there a colleague who can drop me back? Is the metro safe? Is the bus? I mean, just the number of hurdles a woman might have to face just because she has to go from point A to point B and come back takes away so much. I see the caliber of women to just do so many other things,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, absolutely right. Yeah, it is. It's true. And this, they literally, they almost eventually wear like a second skin, all this negotiation,
Yeah.
strategy, this, that, whatever.
And
And they use so many different devices.
And
And the other thing which I want to point out one more thing.
Yeah.
That, even if there's a fear of the public, you think someone's talking, something's happening to you, you feel unsafe. It's amazing. And because I do a lot of workshops with young women, who will come up even after a workshop. Sometimes they share it within the workshop. Sometimes they're too scared to even share it in a workshop on women in public space. They'll come up upstairs and they'll talk about some of these fears, that they don't report these fears to even the people, to their loved ones, people who love them intensely or care for them or their family. And the reason being very clearly because women have learned that this will have protective consequences. Because even out of so-called love for me, they will hold me back and keep me at home. And so many women have talked, a tuition class is dropped, a drama class I like is dropped. I go to this dance class and I'm harassed by these boys this every day. And I had to make a different choice whether not to go past that locker, take a longer route to that class, or just drop that class. But telling at home was not an option, or not telling my loved one, because usually it is they will say, "तुम जाती क्यों? बाहर जाओ नहीं तो ये होगा नहीं. अगर तुम दुनिया में जाओगी तो ये होगा तुम्हारे साथ." And so then, because it's protected, because your little freedom you manage to get will be curtailed, immediately taken back in the name of love. And this is very protective consequence, that you will not say your fears to your closest. So often you have these horrifying experiences in the media reported, but this happened to this woman. And someone said, but we didn't know she was being followed. We didn't know she was being harassed. We didn't know about this about. Her family says we didn't know this about. Of course, nobody knew about it because she had to cope on her own. Where would she, if she could say this to you and know that there would be these protective you would not then lock her up at home. You would find other solutions, but keep her accessibility open, use her freedom to go out open. Then she would tell you this freedom. Say, okay, my freedom to go out is also valued by you. So I can tell you my concern and we can find a collective solution to it. And there are many solutions you can find. But first you should be able to talk about it. But if the first thing is, I will lock you up, then women don't share it. And it's so sad. The people who are, and they are sad that they can't share with people who really care for them and love them.
And in a way, then eventually the women are also negotiating a space for them inside their homes, because they know that that space that they have where they can have conversations about what they want to do in life and everything might just not get the right kind of reception because those freedoms will be curtailed too.
Correct. No, and that's true, because the whole narrative of women's safety is always focused on public space and never on the domestic space, So her safety, her comfort, where she feels at ease, it's always assumed it is home. But not true. For many women, home is actually a very violent space. It is a space they don't feel comfortable. So the fact that you tell women, pack them off and say, ghar jao, ghar pe sab kuch hai, is not necessarily true for all women, So I think we underplay that, the whole narrative around women's safety, sexual safety.
And Sameera, in terms of your conversations with young women, not just for research and through your workshops, but also like over the course of your compendium of reportage that you have generated, I want to highlight how the experiences that you have had of speaking to Muslim women, but a very like heterogeneous group of Muslim women. Like no two Muslim women can be same. They might even be like going to the same school, or they might even be having like same aspirations from life, but something about it changes them differentiates them from one another. And I feel more and more, especially in the world and community that we are living in, there is this constant need to homogenize the Muslim identity, to say like, this is how Muslims are, this is how Muslim women behave. And I think that is where this entire I would say the dichotomy of people wanting to support the women and then shirking away because they wear a hijab, it comes out.
No, you're absolutely right. This homogeneity of always the other, the community which is not yours, portrayed as this homogeneous other. No community is homogeneous. I mean, least of all Muslims. And the Muslims I particularly research are Muslims in Bombay. And they definitely are not a homogeneous community. I think all Muslims are not across the world, all parts of India, but the Bombay Muslim, so-called, for example, is a question mark. You don't know who the Bombay Muslim is. Because Bombay is as one of those cities in South Asia with the most heterogeneous mix of Muslim community. It was a port city and then became a textile mill manufacturing city, and it attracted all kinds of people from the hinterland to the city. And because it attracted different kinds of people, the mix of Shia Sunni, the mix of Deobandi, Barelvi, mix of Gujarati speaking Muslim, Malayalam speaking Muslim, from UP and Bihar Muslims, Dakhani from the Dakhan, all kinds of areas of different kinds of Muslim communities have lived and thrived in Bombay and contributed to the city. And definitely the Muslim women I speak to are very varied. And even, this is the thing. So it's not just hijabi Muslim women versus non-hijabi. Among women who observe hijab, there are many variations. And women who don't observe it, there are also many variations. And not just of education and class. I mean, there's so many other things in what they think about the world, what they think about their religion, what they think about things. So, for example, one difference between the two hijab-clad Muslim women, one of the things is, what kind of hijab is the most appropriate? What kind of burqa, hijab, abaya pehno, monto pehno, what kind of thing is the most ideal thing? Or what is the most appropriate thing as per their faith? And each one has different opinions on that. Then the issue of the niqab, which is the facial covering, which is a very new thing which has come in, a relatively new thing compared to the other aspects of wearing the scarf and headscarf, is there's a lot of resistance from many women who observe hijab to the niqab, who feel that niqab is not an essential part of this thing. But the women who observe the niqab think that now it has become essential. So it's interesting that among them there's so much dichotomy. And then you would keep thinking, no, and difference of opinion. And then everybody says, no, they're all one kind. They're not. But clearly, I think this every time we construct the other, I think there's also a tendency among Muslims to construct the other, the Hindu other, as one homogeneous whole, and they're not. They're extremely heterogeneous. So, of course, language, culture, food. I mean, India, you can go, literally, 10 miles, 20 miles, and you will see there'll be something different in the physical geography, but also in the kind of people, and what they eat, and what they dress. But similarly, it's just true of every community in this country. But I really, definitely, that's why I like the title of your podcast, Maybe Muslim, because all of them can say maybe Muslim, maybe Muslim, maybe Muslim, but we're all different, so many different ways. We may follow all Islam, but like for example, if you have, for example, so often I say, that there can be Muslims in this country who can't speak to each other. So someone said, what do you mean? Like I said, because you assume all Muslims speak Urdu, which is totally wrong. But if you have a Gujarati speaking Muslim and a Malayalam speaking Muslim and someone from Uttar Pradesh speaking Urdu together, they often cannot understand each other. They may be all Muslim and they all may be Indian Muslim, but even then, I mean, nothing else, they will eventually end up arguing about the quality of their biryani. So, that is it. So, and this is to be celebrated. By the way, the other thing is, homogenization doesn't only take place by the other community looking at you, homogeneous. The sad part is the homogenizing is encouraged within community itself. The community itself and, Maulanas and clerics kind of say, hey, this is the way to be Muslim. And sometimes you look at some Islamic republic somewhere else and that Islamic monarchy somewhere else and say, that is the way to be Muslim. And we have to adopt all these things. And this is unfortunately happening. And we're not celebrating what it is to be Indian Muslim. I mean, in fact, when I was talking about when I was growing up and what I celebrated about India, but I also celebrate, this is the thing, that I was Muslim in India, but I was Indian Muslim. It was such an important part of my dad that we could be this or that. And another Indian Muslim could be totally different from me. Language, food, we could argue about certain things. And now this violence, 3 decades of violence of pushing Muslims against the wall, has forced all of us to look at each other and say, tum bhi Muslim, main bhi Muslim, tum bhi Muslim, and we're all supposed to be all together and find this common thing together. That we all follow a particular religion together. So, but we know that we're all very different from each other. And, and so I think that it is a matter to be celebrated and by the community. And I'm finding that unfortunately, that the community a lot. I mean, the more orthodox parts of the Muslim community in India want to homogenize. There's this pressure on them to homogenize. You should have one. These are the 10 things you should be, and this is what being an Indian Muslim is. Of course, they're falling apart because you can't decide by the clearly. For example, you can see certain parts of certain Muslims who have felt, often the image of the North Indian Muslim from UP and Bihar has dominated the Muslim discourse in India. And that's been very unfair to other Muslim communities who are now have in the last 3 decades also asserted themselves. And for example, so for Gujarati Muslims, when they're forced with this image of this North Indian Muslim with Urdu speaking, which is they're not comfortable with, dominating the discourse and representing a Muslim, they're not very comfortable with. And why should they be? I mean, there's a huge chunk of Gujarati Muslims and who have their own cuisine or their own language, whatever, and they have their own practices. But so it's just this to be dominated and say these Muslims dominate over all of you groups. Many of them have not taken different ways. So, for example, they will not encourage, say, Urdu speaking, but because they're not comfortable. So they say if you have to speak, then one linked language should be Arabic. We should start doing everything in Arabic, or look at Arabic. All our children should not, besides your home language, which is Gujarati, we should be focusing on Arabic because it makes sense because you can read a lot of texts which are originally Arabic. So, but we reject this. Vis-a-vis, for Muslim South, it's different. Different parts of the South, which part of the South you come from. But so they're all trying to find this homogeneous idea that we all can rally around Arabic. None of us can disagree about knowing Arabic because we read the Holy Book. So, or then all our architecture has to be of a certain kind of Islamic architecture. All our, I think they're struggling to find a common dress to go, men and women, and we find a common hijab, but we haven't. There are all still differences. I think they keep thinking that this should all be a homogenized whole, but it isn't, and I hope it doesn't get homogenized.
I mean, the Hindi cinema, to the mainstream cinema, I would say, is also to be pointed out for this because the representation of Indian Muslim was very stereotypical, and I remember when I saw Alia Bhatt's character as Safina in Gully Boy. It was so much fun. It was so liberating to have in mainstream cinema. You see a character like her. She's doing what she wants to. She covers her head, and that doesn't stop her from fighting out what she wants to fight out. And as much as I know there is a concerted effort to, and we all know this, to homogenize and to really push the Muslim identity and the Muslims towards a wall. I see even the work that you're doing and the conversations that we are having today offer that kind of breathing room to know that there are constantly people defining and redefining the Indian and the Muslim identity together. And I just have one last question, Sameera, and because I know we want to kind of, as much as I have a lot more questions, I still feel we want to give our audiences an understanding of what this conversation is about. The final question is really about what do you see for the young, I would say, Indian Muslim women on understanding how they can negotiate their space. What is it that constantly needs to be reiterated? I think when we look at some of the figures like Muskan Khan and the way she stood her ground, even when the right wingers were kind of charging towards her, versus a lot of other women who are probably listening to this conversation, who are reading the work and the research that you're doing, or even accessing the understanding of being an Indian Muslim through different ways. What would you want to say to them?
I actually don't feel it's my place to say anything to them because I'm so impressed with the young women in this country and the young Muslim women in this country by what they're standing. I mean, if you see from the CA struggle onwards, I mean, we also had the older women, we also had the middle-aged women. I'm not saying that, but we also had a lot of young women with such spirit they've shown us. I mean, especially since the CA, I think they've always shown it, but it became so apparent in Shaheen Bagh, Mumbai Bagh, Bilal Bagh, where you could see the spirit of Muslim women and young Muslim women standing up, saying their bit, whether they wore the hijab, they didn't wear it, but really reading up the constitution on their rights, talking about rights. I mean, I think they're amazing. The woman in Karnataka who stood their ground. I mean, Muskan Khan is admirable for how she takes on this thing. But, as in the piece I wrote, for me, the image of Muskan Khan, yes, it is powerful that she raises this fist in front of this mob of really aggressive men facing her. But, the first part of that video, when she's driving on her two-wheeler in a hijab, She gets off, she parks her two-wheeler in a college compound, gets off, has a knapsack on her back, and she's charging towards class. And later in the interview, she said, I had a college assignment to submit, and that's why I was running. And then this mob comes towards her. She says what she has to say, raises the fist, and moves towards class. And it's just, what spirit. I mean, she's mobile. She's on her own vehicle. She's come by herself to college. Nobody has dropped her. She's driven herself there. This thing. And then yet you say that this, and all you can see is that scarf on her. You can only see that scarf. You can't see beyond that. She's studying in second year commerce. I read about it. And she talked in an interview about wanting to pursue law. Look at that. She has dreams. She has ambitions. She drove herself to college. And yet all you can see is the scarf. I also want to talk about Aruza Parvez. Aruza Parvez is this year in the class 12 Jammu and Kashmir board exams has topped in the science stream exam. There she got, when they were celebrating her great sort of the way she had done in her exams and how well she had done, people started criticizing her from within the community saying, oh, dekho, wo to hijab nahi kar rahi. She wasn't wearing hijab, and she answered them back saying, no, I don't want to observe the hijab. That's me. So, Muskan has to be celebrated, but so did Aruza Parvez, standing her ground and saying, I don't want to. I was so impressed with both these women, choosing what they wanted, made their voice felt strong, but put in such vulnerable positions. Why were both of them being trolled by both? I mean, Aruza in the case of people who are within the community, and Muskan by people out of the community. Why have they to be this hero, villain? Why are they forced to be in these vulnerable positions where they have to make this very strong stand? They are very young girls. They need to be able to get on with their lives and their dreams and ambitions. So I just want to say, lage raho. It's going to be a long fight. What else? Lage raho. I mean, meri behna. There's nothing more. I mean, I don't have anything. They're following the passions. I don't want anything to stop them. Whether it's the Hindu right wing or the Muslim right wing or anybody else. Just follow the course of your dreams and, in the best possible way you can, what makes you comfortable. And I don't think it's my place to say anything.
I'm so glad you said all that you did. Actually, I mean, I was really hoping that it's a kind of joy, comfort, and encouragement that we can draw out from this conversation. So thank you so much, Sameera, again for your time.
Yeah. Okay. And I will say PS to your Alia Bhatt and Gully Boy thing. You're totally right. I was not paying attention to the male character. The moment she came on in that role as Safina, and the male characters seemed redundant. I don't care if they would be heavily or not. My God. I mean, that guy, she was having fun. That's exactly what Violator's ideas were. You could be wearing this and have fun and access public space and, apne ghar pe bhi kuch keh do, bahar bhi kuch keh do, apna kuch negotiate kar lo. That is it. That is what life is.
I could actually have another episode with you just talking about that character.
Yeah, I have to say, yeah. They're all after this new character she's playing, but I think that's a Safina character or something.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Sameera, again.
I'm impressed with the writer. Yeah.
Me too, honestly. And I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with you. And thanks again for joining us on Main Bhi Muslim.
Thank you, Mariam. Thank you so much for having me.